Hello, my name is Andrea Ortega, and this is my week 4 journal video. So the way that culture and beliefs, personal beliefs, affect children in education is that culture is basically how we behave and what we are, like how we grow up, what customs we have, um, how we sleep, how we eat. Do we use utensils? Do we use tortillas? Do we use chopsticks? You know, there's so much to the different cultures. I can't get away. My son walked in. Something else about culture is that you might hide in your closet to do your homework, and then your son finds you. Yes, like a bed. A big way that culture it impacts the classroom is that by the educators implementing the different cultures of each student, or just introducing different cultures to the students, it could really help them learn about different cultures, and that benefits them in their education as well. So just exposing the children to different cultures can really um, help them in the future have an open mind. Once they're the leaders of tomorrow. So once if they're introduced to everybody of these different cultures, they'll be able to work with more people. Maybe they'll learn another language, and that's another thing. We have to really respect their culture. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we might see something as, oh, I wouldn't do it that way, but you got to remember that sometimes that child may not be used to those certain customs. So we can't say that everything is wrong. Obviously, there's things that are inappropriate, such as aggressive behavior, um, but in the end, there's certain ways children eat or sleep that we may not be used to, but doesn't mean that it's wrong. We got to remember that. So, on to number 2. Something that's very important too when establishing, reciprocal relationship with the families of the children in your classroom. Um, you know, you have to be open-minded. You have to, if you have questions, you'll be surprised. A lot of people like talking about themselves. A lot of people like talking about their culture. So it's really important to be open minded and, try and get involved and ask them, try to get them involved in the classroom. Maybe have them translate a book so that they can share their native language with uh, the classroom, or even come in and they could even just email like you a song that is really popular in their culture, and then they could send it to you like through a YouTube link, and you can play it and translate it, and sing it to the students, and that could make a really big difference in your classroom. And that's another thing, you don't want to make assumptions. You don't know everything about a culture. We don't want to be getting into stereotypes of certain things that we don't understand. So that's why it's important to ask the people the families in your classroom, because they're the experts. They grew up in those in those homes of different cultures and different customs and traditions. So it's really important that they share with you, and you know, it can help you learn, and then you can share it with the rest of the class. And you know, that's the benefit of having new families of different cultures. That could really help you, you know, include some more diverse kind of activities in your learning environment. Okay, so now we're getting into creating plans for developmentally appropriate, culturally and linguistically appropriate learning environments. So, materials and routines, interactions, and learning experiences. What can we do as teachers to implement those kinds of things in the classroom? So, I personally think that, you know, I was actually reading something on the NAEYC.org of a situation where there was a little girl, and she was playing with a doll. She was rocking it to sleep and singing a really sweet song. And the teacher observed that another little girl came over and ripped the doll out of her hand and said, "No, you're supposed to cover her with a blanket and let her fall asleep on her own." And of course, first it says in the website, of course, the teacher. It's quick for the teacher to assume oh, that's wrong, they shouldn't be taking things from the student, which is, that's, she shouldn't be ripping things out of other students' hands. But also, to her, she thinks, her in her home, she's laid down in her room, you know, and she falls asleep on her own. Well, maybe the other little girl that originally had the doll is rocked to sleep, and she sings, and her mother sings her to sleep. So that teacher decided to implement that into the classroom by reading different books. Let me see if I can find the books that she read. Oh, The Napping House, Why Cowboys Sleep with Their Boots On, and Where Children Sleep. So those are a couple of books that she introduced to the classroom, and all of different cultural books, I'm assuming, because that's what it says right here. And from that, the children actually started to practice, do different things in the dramatic play area, such as um, put them to sleep in little sleeping bags. I think she even said that she um, uh, even had the children, some rocked them to sleep, some they had little hammocks that they could put the babies in instead. So, because of that, she used that as an opportunity, as a window to introduce different ways, different cultural ways of sleeping. So instead of yelling at the children, she was able to make a lesson out of it. And not everything happens that easily. Sometimes we're open with an opportunity. We think like, oh, this is it. I'm going to think of something really, a great activity for the children. And sometimes it doesn't always go well, but it's a learning experience. Everything is. So, but this is a great example of how you can take something and turn it into and implement, let's learn about culture. Let's learn about, different, developmentally appropriate practices. That's a good activity you could try to do. Okay, so for the next question, we have how are we develop plans for learning experience that incorporate a range of strategies for supporting English language and literacy development for dual language learners. So, dual language isn't always when children just speak English and Spanish, but right here where I live, it's quite common. But something that teachers can do actually to help the students is, well, I speak Spanish, so when I do activities with children, normally I do a lot of translating, and but also we do help the children try and learn English as well, which is great, and they are learning so fast. Um, but it's really important to give instruction both languages, and even to implement. You can include that in your classroom as well. When you label when you label the different areas, you can do blocks and then translate it into Spanish. And you can also have books that are both English and Spanish or other languages that the children may speak. And that's really important to talk to the parents too. If there is a second language, if there is another language that they speak, so that you can implement that into the classroom and have the children feel more comfortable and at home in the classroom. Now, when we do not speak the same language as the students, normally they do speak English, but you know, it's not their first language. So something that something that we've done before is that we talk to the families. We sit down and we say, what books do they like? What words do you guys use? And we can even ask the children, and they're, if they're not too shy, they're more than happy to be like, oh, we use this for book, and this for bathroom, and this for nap time. So even that is the way that we can reach out to children, making them feel more comfortable in the classroom. Also, if we ask the parents the questions, that gets them more involved in the classroom too. So that's always good. So never be afraid to ask for help from the families, because um, they're the most important. They're the most important thing that's going to help ensure their children's success. And lastly, we're going to discuss utilizing the NAEYC Professional Standards and Competencies for Early Childhood Educators, California ECE competencies to reflect on the working with culturally and linguistically diverse families. So the competencies, I basically think of them as my standards, my goals of where I want to be as an educator. And basically, if you go on the naeyc.org and you look up the competencies, you will find that it gives you a whole list of, where you are at, and you can rate yourself on where you're at in these areas. And they do include being able to implement culturally and developmentally appropriate activities and toys and books into your environment, as well as creating relationships with the families and what's expected of you, to help those families and those children. And also being culturally sensitive, being open minded, and also, it keeps you in check pretty much. Like, is expected of you, and you have to use those. You have to use those as like your rule book. Like, what am I doing in this classroom? You have to know exactly what you're doing all the time. Sorry if that sounded really if I sounded like an airhead, but basically, the competencies are what help us be knowledgeable, be self-aware, be professional, and to be ethical in the classroom. That's the most important thing for us. So use those competencies to your advantage so that you can be the best teacher for your children. This is the end of my week 4 video. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.